So, good morning, everybody listening to the Capital ITS e-learning webinar, which is today on innovation procurement for CITS deployment. We have two speakers in this session. The one is Alexander from Austria, from Austria. The other is me, Eva, from the Austrian Institute of Technology. And if we go one step further to the agenda, you can see how it is structured. After this short welcome, we will first have an introduction to innovation procurement approaches. And after that, a question and answer session. And then we have the second presentation and CITS status of specifications and next procurement steps for deployment. And then again, a question and answer session and a wrap up. I would like to remind you that the session is recorded and afterwards will be available at the Artico internet. So again, for the last who joined us now, a warm welcome to this session. And I would say we just start with the first presentation. So, yeah, I would like to speak today about innovation procurement approaches. And since I have been in this business, so to say, since 2007, I have quite a lot of material, but I will focus today on procurement approaches, since this is an issue raised very often and requires a clarification. And I will especially draw your attention to some of the outputs of the so-called SPICE project, an ICT project in transport. But let me first, come to this very basic question. Who are maybe not you the attendees of this webinar, are asking, but a question very often asked: why innovation procurement? Well, there are several reasons, and I think the most important to start with for what public procurement, and it is public procurement what we are addressing today. What is the aim, the overall goal, the mission of public procurement? It is to provide services for citizens. And of course, the societal environment of public entities and citizens themselves, this is changing. So, and this changing environment of doing their business, the public entities, requires a continuous advancement in public service delivery. Not necessarily, but very often this requires procurement of innovative solutions. But of course, it's not enough to buy clever. It's also important to be yourself clever as public entity, which this is why I have this very explicit here, but I think it's clear anyway, together with in-house innovativeness of public entities. Another category or part, which is, these are only, here you have on this first slide only 3 key messages and a lot of information and backing behind that. But these are 3, let me say, key messages or key issues. after this, having this always in mind that the end user is the most important of all this innovation procurement. Innovation procurement is not a target in itself, but it has to serve something. After this, let's come to a distinction, which may be helpful in this field. You can do this innovation procurement proactive and reactive, and both is good. Both is good. Reactive means procure best available solutions offered by the market. So you find this expression, things that are already on the shelf. So already made on the shelf. And this is good because if you procure something which is already offered, you may have the advantage that there are certificates, that there are improvements, there has been testing. And this is good to do it. In many cases, this is very, very good. But what is the core of this innovation procurement issue is to be a proactive procurer as public entity. This means to demand innovation which are not available on the market. So to give a stimulus to industry, to give a signal to industry that if they do R&D, there is not only a chance, there is a probability that procurement, which means buying, is happening afterwards. And so I came to this third, let me say, block or issue. Advantages altogether is, again, we have the quality of public services, and as well increasing the effectiveness in preparing or delivering public services, but also in the performance of public entities themselves. So if a public entity procures clever and then saves cost in doing its business, of course, it's an advantage. And widening the scope, we can say using the power of the public purse to stimulate innovation while strengthening the competitiveness of suppliers. This is in a nutshell the answer to the question, why procurement? And if there, I'm sure there, or not sure, maybe there are questions further to it, I'm ready to answer it in the question answer session. Example, it's always important not to speak in the blue sky, but to illustrate what is meant by all these things. And I thought for this short webinar, it's best I do not overwhelm you with a long list of good practice examples which are existing, but I select some to show you very specific these different types, where you can see on the basis of an example what are these different approaches. And I choose one public entity, which is the Austrian Motorway and Expressway Corporation. And to show you that when you have different innovation needs, you can use different procurement approaches. And this is also a message that, first of all, innovation procurement is not the solution for every problem. So first, need identification has to take place. The second is that you can choose between different approaches. I will come back to the range of approaches. And you have to choose of one of them, and different need situations can be addressed with different approaches. Let us look at two approaches from ASFINAG, the Austrian Motorway and Expressway Corporation. You find here, okay, there should, you find here the first example, which combines a pre-commercial and a commercial procurement. For those of you who are familiar with the topic of innovation procurement, this is very clear. I will be very brief for those who are not so much experienced on it. What does it mean, pre-commercial and commercial procurement? Usually, every public entity has to follow procurement law. We have the European Procurement Directive from 2014, which has already been transposed in every member state in national law. And this agreement, which is also backed by the World Trade Organization, the WTO, that every public procurer has above a certain threshold to procure, to make these tenders on European level visible and on international level, of course. But the important point concerning innovation procurement is that R&D services are an exemption on the global level, WTO, on the European level, directive, and transposing this directive also on the national level. So when we talk about pre-commercial procurement, in the first approach in it is to know that we talk about R&D, research and development services. They are exempted. Nevertheless, the Commission, based on a US-American model, developed at least three-stage approach, which is called in all the official documents pre-commercial procurement, or PCP. Some of you might be familiar with this abbreviation. And ASFINAG did a BCP. So it's a pre-commercial, it's an R&D. It follows, since it is an exemption from procurement law, more or less the R&D subsidy rules. So it goes up to prototypes and up to test beds, but not in commercialization. This is the reason why we have on the left of this figure the blue field, pre-commercial procurement, which is followed by commercial procurement. What is very important on this approach in pre-commercial procurement is that between pre-commercial and commercial, there is a clear cut. So this means that not only those who has been participating in the pre-commercial phase can participate in the commercial one, but it is opened also for others. This is to follow the competition rules, transparency, and all these things which are set down in the directive and in the national law. The European Commission PCP approach foresees three phases, as you can see. It starts with a call for ideas and short descriptions. And in the case of ASFINAG, who asked for ideas on the development of an innovative mobile traffic management system, they got seven first proposals which met all the criteria. Then there was an interim evaluation, first evaluation with an independent, together from the public entity and an independent jury. And out of this, there were five selected, which for 50,000 euro could make the next step. So it was, you see, this is like a filter. You have very, very many at the beginning. Of course, they got more proposals, but seven met the criteria. So, and from this first, they select five and paid them 50,000 euro to make kind of feasibility. Then the next evaluation came, again a jury, and out of them two were selected. And so the pre-commercial procurement process ended with two different suggestions, prototypes of solutions. And then they made a commercial procurement, so a full tender published on all the necessary organs, and made a procurement of an intelligent mobile warning sign trailer. From the perspective of ASFINAG, this was quite a successful thing or way to do it. They had quite a lot of learning of it. One of the major issues, well, of course, there were some difficulties they faced. One of the major issues was IPRs, but this is something which could be solved in the course, and they had quite a lot of learning and a good outcome, and they are happy with this approach and have learned for the future where to use it and where not. You have to be aware that the first part, this pre-commercial part, takes quite a time. So there must be the innovativeness of the tendering, or the volumes or other reason must be striking enough that you take all these activities on your shoulders. But ASFINAG, they are proud on it. They present it. You can find it on their webpage, and they are happy that they have done it. We come now to another example, which is ACUT, acoustic tunnel monitoring. Here they choose a very different approach. It also started with R&D, but not with this three-stage pre-commercial procurement process, but on the basis of R&D projects which were funded from two different funds, from one of the national level, one on a regional level, and together with R&D expert, they developed pilots for approved advanced acoustic tunnel monitoring. And then they started a quite comprehensive testing phase. What I learned in all these things is the tunnel monitoring. You are a transport expert. I'm an innovation procurement expert, but you know it maybe better than me that this is a high-tech thing and very critical, very sensitive. So again, you have R&D and you have commercial procurement, but this is a very different way as it was done. First, let me say more or less classical R&D projects, then long testing, and starting in 2014, a framework contract for procurements, because in Austria, as you may know, we have many mountains and many tunnels, and so it will last till 2022. So different case, different approach. Fits very well for ASFINAG. So since time is running, I come now, what I announced just before, to the overview on innovation procurement approaches. So you see, first we had, if you look at the third one, pre-commercial procurement. This is one which we had before. So it's not part of the procurement directive as a rule. It's not a process specified there, but it is explicitly mentioned in the directive. Then you have commercial procurement, which you can do, and this is the first two, is very usual. You all know that competitive procedure with negotiation or a competitive dialogue. Both procedures are very, very good for innovation procurement to use. Then we have something which ASFINAG is just now trying out. You see, ASFINAG is a quite innovative company concerning procurement activities. It is this innovation partnership. Since this is only in its starting phase and the information is not available publicly, I am not allowed to say more about it, but only that they are just trying out this instrument of innovation partnership, which combines, according to the EU directive, the pre-commercial procurement and the commercial procurement in one instrument. So different to PCP, it's not that you have this clear cut between pre-commercial and commercial procurement, but you make you can, from the same people which you developed before, you can buy. And the last thing I wanted to like to draw your attention now is do the effective use of technical specifications. Some of you may have heard a lot of this, what some are calling functional procurement. Well, functional procurement is something which is sometimes said, but it's per se, it's not a procedure in the sense of the European directive and the transposed national law, but it is more that in the technical specifications it's foreseen in all the procedure that it can be formulated either in terms of performance requirements or in terms of functional requirements. And of course, if you want to procure something innovative, maybe you don't know the exact performance criteria, and then you have the option to describe it as a functional requirement, which leaves quite a lot of space for the suppliers how they describe their approach to the solution. And I think my 15 minutes are up, and so I thank you for the attention. Do this, and I will not go, since I used too much time before, do all the things of the SPICE learning, only that I want to draw your attention on that public, very briefly, public procurement, use it as a strategic tool, giving the suppliers very early a notice that you want to do it. If you're a public procurer, they have the chance to adapt. Ensure that the pre-qualifying requirements are achievable by new business and SMEs. This is, of course, an innovation policy issued, giving SMEs a chance that you engage the end users. I think it's nothing to emphasize this extra. And this is the last one, this last learning I've selected for here from the SPICE project is on the address of policymakers to support public procurers to, for example, by offer a financial cushion or something like that to improve the risk resiliency. Yes, and this was a very, very quick overview, and now I am ready for your questions to answer if you have any.
Yeah, if there are no questions, then I think we can, or if you keep them in mind, and then you can put them also at the end of the seminar to both presentations, if they are common ones. Or obviously, if some parts of these presentations request for further thought, you can also, after the seminar, come back to us and ask directly back, or at Capital or at the single presenters of this seminar. So if there are no questions, I would propose to change to the second presentation of the seminar and go into the details of one example. Do you see my screen? Second part of the presentations. Do you see my screen, and is it transmitted correctly? Yes. Okay. And I'm now introducing a second part of this, in this Capital seminar, a second part of this topic, going to a concrete example of how CITS deployment is done and how this is done in public procurements. And I will do this with the following set and presentation. First, I think it's good to show at least some of the background of the CITS development in Europe to understand how then the legal framework came up, which is now called the Delegated Act, what it contains and what are the basis for this procurement in several European countries. And then I think we will go into the examples and elements where these CITS deployment steps are done for rolling out day one services and for procuring these central stations, software applications, and so on. And at the end, we will come back to our conclusions in the seminar, and we give you some time for asking additional questions. But first, let's go back to the background for this whole CITS development, and which is now coming on our European roads, but has started as a research topic more or less 10 years ago. So also in this time frame, you see how long the transmission time between basic research projects, writing the respective standards, and the final implementation at the roadside is. From a legal point of view, our background is the ITS directive at the EU level, where CITS and connecting vehicles and infrastructure is one of the topics of the priority actions in that directive. Then at the same time, EU started the so-called CITS platform, which had two phases from 2013 on the first one, and then 2016-17 the second. And I think it is good to understand that this CITS platform made a big step forward for all the participants in defining this, what now is called the Day One CITS list. So this is really the agreed set of services which needs or which will be implemented by all participants in Europe at the same time. And by doing this with a kind of package deal, you come in onto the road and have several of your direct applications in transport rolled out at once. And this was a big, in my understanding and seen afterwards, this was a big achievement, because otherwise you always have the topic is with which of the services do you start, where can you experience it, and so on. So this was an important part of this CITS platform. And the second important part is, at the time it was not a topic of this high importance, but it was seen as one of the major cornerstones. And this was the security of the data communication, has been defined together by all the experts who participated in the CITS platform and defined the first version of the CP. This is the certificate policy. And also had a first feedback on the data privacy of users, a specific topic. Also, this was taken up then at a later point in time again. And I think what is always also important in this in the kind of platform work was it introduced the cooperation between public entities, public authorities, and industry companies who really brought in their knowledge as an expert and came to common definitions, for example, of the day one services, but also of the security elements. And this was, I think, an important part, which then led the way to further define these main goals in the next step of this development with, for example, for the public authorities in the C-Roads platform, but also for the vehicle and OEM manufacturers who did in the meantime form the car-to-car communication consortium, and which together spoke for the vehicle manufacturers how they implement cooperative systems, or as how they are now called, CITS systems in vehicles. From the beginning on, this effort was defined with the basis that all the specifications that are done in the CITS platform, but also at the single platforms who worked on the specifications, that these specifications are public and accessible to third parties. And not only the specifications are public, but also the test and validation element, the test and validation events were accessible to any third party. So if you as an industry were active in that area, you could not only have a look at the latest version of the specifications, but you could also come and join any test event. They were public, and you could go to some of them. You will then see examples in the Netherlands, in Germany, in several European countries, which started their test events based on these specifications. And the final element, which was also defined at that point in time already, is that these CITS tests are based on the standards from ETSI and ETSI ITSG5 background, but also are from the beginning on targeting hybrid communication, meaning also using cellular networks. And this is now the outcome also of the CITS Delegated Act, even if for most of us this seems to be a first step only for ITSG5, but the basic Delegated Act is addressing different kinds of telecom networks, and it will be possible to extend this in the future, I think, quite easily, and extend the service distribution via also other technical networks. So the conclusion of this phase, of this background, is, in my view, that you really, the public authorities in the member states, but also the industry companies and operators started to work together and made clear, okay, we want to introduce this day one set of services till a specific point in time, and this specific point in time is this year, so 2019. We have spoken about this day one service set, and here you see these 13 day one specifications, and which is nothing exceptional. Yeah, this is events you as a driver, if you drive along the road or if you travel along the road, if they are ahead of you, you would like to be warned from it if it is a specific danger. For example, a traffic jam which is ahead on your road, or if you in the city called signal violation, intersection safety, if you approach a traffic intersection in a city with quite a high speed, you would like to be warned that you need to slow down, and if it is red, that you stop your vehicle and you decrease your speed, or if it is still green, and this would be the other part, that you get an optimal speed recommendation to pass this intersection with the green light and with your current phase when you're approaching it. Another part of this day one set is, for example, generated by vehicles, the emergency brake light. If a vehicle brakes very harshly, it sends out a message: attention, hard braking vehicle, and the surrounding ones get this message and they see that there is a specific reason for braking quite harshly and reducing the speed in a really short time frame. All these specifications are available since in the release 1 since September 2017, and have been updated accordingly in the meantime till January 2019, when the release 1.4 was published. And so this full set of specifications is publicly available and is defined till the single detailed level of every single bit level of the message. And if you would like to, you can directly have access to it, request it, or hear from the C-ROADS platform, as I put the link down. Or for the vehicle parts, you obviously also have access to the car-to-car part of the specifications. Who is this platform? Who does these common specifications in Europe? Here you see the C-ROADS core members, which are in the meantime 16 member states in Europe. And we have also associated members from outside Europe who agreed to use these specifications. These are countries like Israel, Australia, Russia. I mean, several of countries which are outside Europe have in the meantime became associated members of C-ROADS, and this means that they will also use these common specifications for CITS which have generated in Europe, but they will use these set of specs also in their procurement tenders. So now, one background of this procurement tender is now also the legal certainty that you have as a public authority. And you know that only a few weeks ago, at the beginning of February, this so-called CITS Delegated Act has been published by the European Commission and sent forward to European Parliament and Council. And very briefly, or a very short summary of this is that you have first, it was done already at the the start on the work on the delegated act was done already in parallel when the expert groups and meetings started to develop the specifications, which are now included as an annex. Then it was the concentration of the work at expert level was for this whole day one set of applications. And this is now defined. A second important element which was taken up from the CITS platform is that this delegated act defines a single trust domain in Europe. So the security elements for all the message transmissions between CITS stations, the abbreviation of it is EU CCMS, the Security Credential Management System. You can look at the details, how this is defined, what should be used, and how this is be done. We will then have a brief look into it. In one sentence, it is a public PKI, public key infrastructure system, which distributes the credentials to all the participating network participants in CITS. And this delegated act contains not only the list of standards which are used within CITS, but contains also the details of these standards to really communicate between stations without errors. So it is the I2V, the V2V, the V2I communication profiles and the messaging are defined and are attached as a complete specifications for every kind of CITS station. At the same time, it defines who can be part of the CITS network, how the policy decisions are taken, and several other things. So you can look at the details of this specification and their annexes at the link I have provided below. I think one thing I would briefly like to go into it is the public key infrastructure, which is included for CITS security. Please be aware that this is not covering full cybersecurity of the CITS stations. Yes, but these are only the technical elements which are needed that all these stations communicate between them in a fully trusted way, even if they meet them the first time. So if you imagine you are with your vehicle from Austria, you go to a holiday to Portugal, and at the Portuguese intersection, your vehicle gets the first message from this intersection in Portugal, and is nevertheless, you trust the message of this intersection, and this intersection trusts the message your vehicle sends out. And this, what you see here, is the background for this one single trust domain and the exchange of traffic information in standardized CITS messages. And the elements which are needed at European level are here on the left-hand side. This is the so-called trust list manager. And then you have a central point of contact. Sorry for the many abbreviations, but this is the CITS point of contact, as like it's mentioned here. And this central point of contact and the trust list manager, they publish the ECTL, the European Common Trust List, all the root CAs, all the trusted members in a list, in a coded list, and this is available to all the people who run their stations or in their vehicles or at infrastructure site. And then you have the chance to recognize trustable partners of this network and category their messages as right and correct. Please be aware that this EU root CA has no different meaning than the other ones, which can be set up or by a ministry or by a private partner. Any private partner in Europe who wants to join the CITS network and who wants to have this root CA, which is the center of trust, in his own company or in his own service provision contract, can do this. And there is no difference, formally, there's no difference between the one root CA which is run by the European Union and the other ones who are private or publicly available for the other partners. Okay, now this central part of the CITS Delegated Act are obviously CITS stations. Yes, what is such an ITS station? And here you see a typical example: a roadside trailer where it put down at the end of a roadworks warning, you would see this roadside on it, and you would see a CITS station which sends out exactly the same message: attention, roadworks warning, there is a closed lane, please switch to the other lane and decrease your speed. This is, in simple words, what the CITS station is. In this kind of mobile one, then there are obviously ones which can also be included directly in the vehicle stations. And at the end of the day, most of the public road operators have also central CITS stations, because there is the place where they link these stations with the existing traffic management systems, and where they can play this this high quality traffic information out to other participants as well. So please be aware that these public authorities which now prepare for CITS rollout, they will also invest a lot of money in having better traffic information available, and you can distribute this in the future also via mobile app, via other channels. You can be sure that this is part of their procurement and part of their questions they have. Final element which I would like to mention to it: not only the specs are publicly available, but also this planning and the cross testing of this interoperability of services was quite an effort, and was done in the last years, and still will be kept on up to the systems are on the road and running. And I will now show you one or two examples of this. Typical test CITS cross test for interoperability. You see one of the intersections where the green traffic light is shown. You see on the left hand side how this green traffic light would be shown. Sorry for the bad layout, but how this would be shown in your car HMI. And for test purposes, you then obviously see that there is a video stream going with it, where you see that this is the drive through such an intersection. You see there's a map window. These are the active CITS stations where you get messages from. There is obviously the list of incoming messages which you get from this CITS stations. You have the video recording in your car, and at the end of the day, you have your HMI panel where you can look how this would look like. Obviously, the real implementations in everyday cars will look much more attractive than our test and validation equipment. To show you another example that this is really necessary to test such CITS specifications, here from an intersection from the Netherlands in Helmond, and you see the points and the lanes that are electronically coded in a CITS message only for one intersection. Yeah, and I think we don't need to go into details what all these lanes and all these points mean, but I think alone from the overview, it becomes clear that this has to be checked, tested, that all these points are understood by all the CITS all the CITS participants the same way, like they have been defined and electronically coded. So I think it's a good overview picture. And you see a second one. If you do this for a similar, make a graphical visualization of an intersection topology, how it is defined in the map message, and map is one of the CITS messages, then you also here see how many lanes are defined and how many of them need to be coded electronically and then switched from one vehicle or from one intersection to all the vehicles passing by. Please be aware that here also the roadside lanes are coded. Yeah, so it does seem that some of these lanes are off the street. This is correct, but they are off the street and should be on the road lane which is passing by this intersection. I think you, with these examples, you fully agree with me that an intensive cross-site testing is needed and will also be needed in the future, simply to get all this digital coded content correct and transmitted correctly between the participating partners. Okay, I try to come to my conclusions out of this seminar. And in my view, this delegated CITS delegated act is a good basis for CITS deployment in Europe. The day one services are defined and the specifications and the standards are publicly available. They have been tested extensively on European roads, and possibilities to test them even now are still open and still available. So as you have seen before, I think 60 from the 16 countries which are partners in C-Roads, I think more than 10, 11 or 12 have already launched their public tenders, and they are exactly searching for the CITS stations which roll out CITS services. And there is a strong cooperation between road infrastructure operators and vehicle manufacturers for CITS introduction. And most of us are still convinced that the first stations will become operational in this year, in 2019. And the launch of these tenders has been done last year, but they are now being concluded, and then the contracts will be awarded. So my final statement for this seminar would be, if you want to be part of the CITS products on the road and develop new services, please, if you have not done so yet, please do so immediately and start thinking about what your future traffic services could be in the CITS environment. I know this was a very quick roundup and a very quick set, but please, if you need additional information related to this topic, or come back to me, or first look up the documentation available, which is included also in the presentations, and then come back to me directly via mail or the way you like. But first, can we ask if you have additional questions to this topic and what was presented?
So I think there was one first question concerning me, the innovation procurement, which can be answered very quickly. To do this, I just share again my presentation. So shows now. Is it okay? Sharing, show screen, show my screen. Okay, I hope you can see now this overview again.
Yes.
And the question was, thank you for the confirmation. The question was the distinction between pre-commercial procurement and commercial procurement. And the question was, does it mean that from the EU Commission point of view, no innovation can be considered under a commercial procurement process? No, maybe I was not clear enough. Thank you to give me with this question the opportunity to clarify now. Of course you can procure innovation. Of course you can do it. And the first of these two, competitive procedure with negotiation or competitive dialogue, or using the technical specifications are done in a functional mode or specified as functional require modes, are especially foreseen in the directive and the transposed national law to do this. The only thing is that you can split it if you know what you want to get, and if you trust the supplier because you know him maybe, or you have done business before with him. It's not necessary to go through all this pre-commercial procurement process. But sometimes, if it is an innovative solution you're looking for, you know the problem, but maybe not so explicit how it will work, or you're curious what the market can deliver on different possible solutions, and then you split it and use it. But if you know more or less what you want, or maybe you know that some of your suppliers have some prototypes in their backhand which they are eager to sell but which are not already on the market, it's not necessary to split between these, and you use a standard procedure, because competitive procedure with negotiation is a standard procedure, and can do innovation procurement with that. I hope this answer helped. Thank you. And I think there was another question addressing Alexander. Maybe Alexander, you can take over.
Yes, I can take over if I would like use one of my slides to address the question of what the implementation status is, and am I allowed to go back? It is yeah, it is related to the EU central elements and what the implementation status is. So at the end of February, there has been an ETSI plug test, and the first version of this ECTL, of the European Common Trust List, and of the protocols that you need to get listed on this trust list and how this trust list is distributed, was part of the plug tests in ETSI. So the development of these central elements has been contracted. The prototypes will be for the Trust List Manager and the CBOK. They are available now as prototypes, and they will be fixed during this year. The same as the contract has been launched also for the EU Route CA. And there is also the question of scalability. I think this EU Route CA will at least support. This was the target values. Yeah, will at least support in the first 3 years up to 10 additional route CAs, so in parallel. Yeah, so distributing this message to as many route CAs which are linked to it as possible. And I think the number of enrollment authority and authorization authorities, so the entities which are then linked to such a route CA, is for the first years is estimated by up to 50,000 CITS stations as a starting value. So the expectation at EU level is that the outcoming of all these tenders of the public procurers is going really in large numbers, and therefore quite a large number of CITS stations can be supported by these central elements. Does this answer your question fully? Okay, excellent. At the same time, please be aware that whoever would like to run such a security BKI element on his side as a service provider, then I think this can be run or can be decided company internally or by service providers. Okay, there is a second question. Wait a minute. How is the intention to include alternative technology networks and other manufacturers in these pictures? Yes. Please be aware that in the Delegated Act, there is a full, even in the current Delegated Act, there is a full procedure how you in the future could add an additional annex, an additional communication profile. You could then decide that this communication profile supports the day one list of applications and distributes those via an additional network. So the possibility is already foreseen in the current Delegated Act. If these communication profiles are ready as specifications and are publicly available, they can be put forward as an additional request for including it in the Delegated Act. And already now in the current version, this is foreseen that this is possible in the future, but always starting with the completed and publicly available specification of this set. This should be possible very soon. And yes, there is an additional question for the implementation of the day one services. And here, I think this is really one of the elements which is still not fully specified and open, but I think here there is currently the work ongoing for defining this so-called hybrid interface. And I would expect that already very soon now you get full access to this CITS information via a hybrid interface, and then can distribute this full day one set in your service environment But I would expect this is, no, this is not ready yet. This still needs till Q2, latest Q3 of this year. But then I think this interface is available and the full content of the day one services is available on this interface. Okay, if this answered the question, are there any additional ones? Okay, seems not the case. Then we try to, am I allowed to go back? Then I try to summarize. I think we have heard in the first part of the presentations the introduction to smart procurement and the several process steps which do exist in a procurement environment, from pre-commercial procurement, this handover within pre-commercial and real procurement, and then doing this with prototyping or with long-term service contracts. And in the second presentation of today, you have heard how this procurement is done by several of the public authorities in Europe based on common specifications. I hope you did get a good overview in the procurement topic, and especially in this connected vehicle topic, because please, this would be my final remark to this common seminar. Please be aware that this CITS rollout in Europe is a first step for all the connected vehicle environment. Yeah? So these day one applications are only really the so-called day one. There will be many other applications and a lot of development work needed to really get connected vehicles on the road. And I think this will be then followed up also by several of the partners involved. I see that there's a question that if we can put in the link for the delegated act, I think we can include it simply in our presentations. And it was also, wait a minute, if I go back my presentation, it was also in the final version. You get it also at HTTPS European Transport and CITS. You get also the link to the delegated act and these annexes. Okay. If there are additional questions, please come back to us. Otherwise, thank you for joining the webinar and hear or see you soon. Thank you for participating today, and bye. Have a nice weekend.